He was considered useless because he could only use production magic, and he was exiled by his father, but it turns out his mana is limitless, so he can create almost anything with just his imagination, and he transforms the village he was sent to into a complete fortress like he's playing a tower defense game. The story begins as a salaryman is reincarnated as a boy named Van Ferratio, and as he looks outside the window, his mate Teal tells him to be careful. He comments on how impressive the sight is, but she's surprised by how well he can talk, since he's only 2 years old. We learn that he has memories of his time he spent in Japan, so he knows that he was reincarnated. As Van eats with his family, his father Marquis Galpa asks his brothers what they'll be doing today, so they tell him they plan to practice their magic. He also wonders what Van plans to do, so he mentions that he wants to study the nation's culture and history, and his father looks forward to his magical aptitude appraisal when he turns 8. We learn that magical aptitude is important in this world, since nobles rely on magic to protect their people, and the 4 elements are considered the best. The nobles with an aptitude for other types are seen as a disgrace, and we learn that Van's brothers all possess one of the 4 elements, so Galpa is proud of them. After that, Van asks Teal about magic tools, so she tells him about the crystals and gemstones that can store magic, and the other maids can't believe he can understand her, since he's still so young. The talented butler Esparta gives him a simple math problem, and he manages to solve it, so Esparta realizes he's a prodigy and decides to become his tutor. Van spends the next 2 years learning from Esparta, and he has a duel with Teal when he turns 4, but she easily dodges his attacks and just runs away. After a year, Van fights a soldier in training and manages to defeat him, so the other kids think he's amazing. A commander named D recognizes his talent, and he decides to teach him how to wield a sword, since he wants him to become the nation's greatest swordsman. Van notes that he still needs to study under Esparta, but D offers to plead his case for him and promises to go easy on him during their training. But Van later realizes it was a lie, as D makes him train non-stop, and even tells him to sit on an imaginary chair when he's resting, since it will strengthen his legs. Teal gives him a towel, and he uses it to wipe his face, as he thinks about how he's been having fun since he was reincarnated, so he wants to enjoy his life to the fullest. Everyone recognizes Van as a prodigy when he turns 6, but we learn that he never stopped training and studying, so he burns out and tells Teal he wants to play outside. She takes him to the market, where she shows him the Merry Chamber of Commerce, but they see a man dragging his son, and Van wonders why his hands are tied. So the man explains that he plans to sell him into slavery, and Teal notes that poor families are known to sell the children they can't feed, since they need money to survive. A woman named Rosalie welcomes Van to the Chamber of Commerce, and he asks her how much the boy is worth. His father reveals that he can use thieving magic, but Rosalie notes that he's only worth 3 large silvers, which makes the man angry. He beats up his son and tells him they're going to a different shop, but Van offers to buy him for 5 silver. The man takes the money and runs off, while Van asks for the boy's name, so he introduces himself as Kamzan, and Van tells him he's free to go, explaining that he only bought him since he wanted to help. He realizes that Kamzan has nowhere to go, so he invites him to stay at his mansion, but his guards explain that Galpa won't accept him into the household, unless Van brings him in as his slave. Rosalie helps them form a slave contract, which causes a symbol to appear on Kamzan's hand, and she explains that it won't disappear unless their contract is nullified. They return to the mansion, where Kamzan notes that Dee is looking for Van, but he gives Kamzan a cookie and orders him to tell Dee that he isn't there. He wonders why Kamzan isn't wearing gloves, so he explains that he wants everyone to see the symbol on his hand, but Van tells him to wear the gloves that he bought for him. Kamzan tells Dee that Van isn't in his room, and Dee doesn't believe him, but he finds him interesting, so he decides to train him instead. When Van finally turns 8, it's time for his magical aptitude appraisal, so everyone looks forward to hearing the results. But Galpa is surprised to learn that he has no aptitude for any of the 4 elements, and he can only use production magic, which is considered the worst type of all. Galpa explains that it's useless, since it only allows its user to create swords and accessories by imagining them, and he thinks Van won't be able to protect the people with it. He tells Van he's a disgrace, since he's the only member of their family who can't use any of the 4 elements, and Galpa prepares to execute him. But his eldest brother Mursa suggests letting him rule a remote village, which is close to their rival kingdom of Yelneta, and we learn that it only has value as a training camp. Galpa thinks it's a good idea, since they can make the villagers loyal to them by assigning Van as their lord, and after he leaves, Myrsa tells Van he made the proposal because he didn't want him to be executed, promising to do what he can to help him. As Van prepares to leave, he actually looks forward to being the lord of a rural village, since it means he'll have time to relax. We learn that only Kamzan was assigned to travel with him, but Myrsa hired 10 adventurers to guard him, and Teal notes that she'll join him as his personal maid. Dee abandons his post to follow him, since he wants to continue teaching him everything about the sword, and Esparta explains that he retired early, so that he can continue to train Van as his successor. They leave in a carriage, and we learn that it doesn't bear the Marquis' crest, since Galpa wanted to send Van away in secret, but the villagers see him off. Dee's friend tells him they informed the people about his departure, so they decided to organize a grand send-off, and he thanks them as he bids them farewell. Van uses his production magic to turn a branch into a knife, and explains that he's trying to learn how it works, but when they reach the village, they see that it's being attacked by bandits. He notices that it's surrounded by walls, but it doesn't protect the villagers from the arrows, and he realizes that there are over 50 bandits at the gate. Dee suggests attacking them head-on, but the leader of the adventurers, Ortho, explains that it's too dangerous since they're vastly outnumbered. He notes that they were only hired to guard Van until he reaches the village, and explains that he won't risk his comrades' lives to defeat the bandits, so Dee decides to fight without their help. But Esparta is against it, since he thinks the village will have no future if Dee dies in battle, and he reveals that he's an elemental mage. He plans to use his earth magic to create a defensive wall, and tells the adventurers to fire ranged attacks from behind it, so that Dee and his men can flank the bandits while they're distracted. But Van is against it, since he knows that Esparta plans to act as a decoy, and he knows that his father would execute him if Esparta and Dee lost their lives. So he decides to be the one to act as the decoy, and tells everyone to stick to the plan, telling them that he won't die since he has Dee's training. Ortho recalls that when they received the mission to guard Van, they all thought he was like the other nobles who looked down on them, but he suddenly appeared before them. He thanked them for accepting the mission, and told them he would count on them, so they realized that they were wrong about him. Ortho decides to join the battle, explaining that he won't let Van put his life at risk, and the mage named Ariel notes that they'll trust him with their lives since he isn't like the other nobles. Esparta notes that they'll modify their strategy, and explains that he'll create a defensive wall and fire ranged attacks, so that Ortho and Dee can flank the bandits from both sides. Everyone decides to go with his plan, so he creates an earth wall behind the bandits, who continue to raid the village, but they suddenly get attacked from behind. They see Ariel with a group of archers, so they rush towards them, but Dee and Ortho cut them down, and the bandits panic as they realize they're surrounded. They get slaughtered by the knights and adventurers, so they start to run away, but their leader rushes to attack Ariel, but Van suddenly cuts his legs, and Kamzan finishes him off. They capture the remaining bandits, and Ortho is glad that they suffered no casualties, but tells the adventurers their quest is over once they receive their payment. He notes that he wants to stay with Van since he finds him interesting, and half of the adventurers leave for their next quest. But Ariel and the others mention that they also like Van, so they decide to stay with him as well. Everyone meets the villagers, and Van introduces himself as their new lord, but their chief Ron tells him the bandits are always attacking them. He explains that when they were part of the Ferdinando County, the knights always patrolled their area, but they were neglected by the Ferratios after they joined them. He thinks Galpa doesn't care about them since they pay almost nothing in taxes, so Van explains that it isn't the case, and notes that the laws of the kingdom are to blame, but they can't do anything to change it. He explains that they should focus on improving their village, so that it will become so valuable that the kingdom can't ignore it, and he notes that he'll help them achieve it as their new lord. He realizes that they don't trust him since he's just a kid, but Esparta and Dee vouch for him, so they start to believe in him. They ask him if he can use any magic, so he notes that he only has aptitude for production magic, and they instantly lose faith in him again. One of them notes that they struggle to pay 30% of their harvest as taxes, so Van decides to cut it down to 10% and explains that they need to focus on securing a stable way of life first. He orders Esparta to create a wall of dirt around the village, which will serve as temporary protection until they can improve their defenses, and he notes that he also wants to build a moat around it. So Dee offers to take care of it, and notes that they can even add traps to keep the bandits away. After that, Van heads to the forest, where he uses his production magic to make the logs as hard as possible, and he ends up creating wood blocks. Ortho finds them interesting, and he tries to destroy one of them, but everyone realizes that he can't even scratch it. Van uses them to create weapons, and Teal wonders why he still isn't exhausted, since production magic is extremely mana-consuming. But he has no idea how mana works, and he creates a sword for Kamzan, who promises to treasure it. He notices that Teal also wants a weapon, so he gives her an axe, and she pretends to like it, but he can tell that she's disappointed. The next day, Van gathers the blocks he made, and uses his production magic to build a mansion, which impresses everyone. They can't believe he was able to build it in an instant, and his companions are happy that they finally have a place to call home, so he realizes that his production magic isn't so useless after all. Ortho realizes he's stronger than a regular production magic user, and he offers to build houses for anyone who gives him the materials he needs, so Dee and Ortho quickly order their men to collect wood. But the chief notes that everyone in the village needs his help, since their homes are in terrible shape, so he uses his magic to build new houses for them. They're amazed that he has the mana capacity to build a new neighborhood, and he explains that he arranged everything in a grid plan to make the village organized. After that, Van also builds a public bath next to his mansion, and we see Teal and Ariel taking a bath, as they talk about how amazing he is. That evening, Van also takes a bath, and he notices that Kamzan has gained muscle, so he explains that it's because he's been training with Dee. Dee and his knights suddenly join them, so Van tries to leave, but Dee stops him, and notes that they must deepen their friendship by sharing the bath. After some time, we see that Dee and his knights were able to build a trench around the village, and the next step is to fill it with water. They head to a nearby river, where Sparta uses his magic to dig a trench, but it's only a few meters long, so Dee and his knights continue to expand it, while Van reinforces the sides and bottom of the trench. Teal notes that they still have a long way to go before they reach the village, and Van thinks it will take them a week, but after a few hours, they realize that they're already close to the village, because everyone's been digging like crazy. Van tells everyone they should call it a day, and Dee still wants to continue, but he realizes that the others are already exhausted, so he agrees to go back. The next day, we see that they've already completed the canal, and they let water flow into it, allowing it to reach the village. But Van realizes that it might flood if it rains, so he decides to make a lake behind the village, which will also serve as a reservoir they can use during a drought. We see Van as he fortifies the wall, mixing stone into the dirt to make it as hard as concrete, but he still isn't satisfied, and he adds ballistas to the top, so they can protect themselves against anyone that might attack them. Dee realizes that Van turned the village into a fortress, and thinks Galpa would have made him the head of the house if he had learned about his power. But Sparta disagrees, and explains that Van's power is perfect for protection, but it isn't suited for conquering. They start to argue, but Van stops them, and explains that they just need to make do with the powers they have, since frustration over their talents won't do them any good. Teal gives Van food, and she's glad he likes it, but notes that she was worried since they don't have a lot of ingredients there. Sparta explains that they must do something about the village's income, and notes that they have no connections, but Van thinks it's fine, since the village's crops are enough to feed all of them. Sparta mentions that they don't have the ingredients for his favorite desserts, so he instantly changes his mind, and thinks they should come up with something the village can sell. After that, there's an adventurer that wants to test the weapons Van created, and shows him his shield, as he boasts about how durable it is. So Van orders Kamzan to attack with his sword, but he doesn't want to ruin it since Van gave it to him, so he only lightly taps it, but it still easily cuts it in half, and the adventurer starts to cry, so Van quickly repairs it with his magic. Ortho shows them the ores he was able to gather, and explains that he found them at the foot of a nearby mountain range, revealing that he even got mithril. He thinks nobody bothered to explore it since it's in a remote area, so Van thinks it must be full of resources, and he uses his magic to turn an iron ore into a block. The adventurer asks him to use it to create 2 swords, so he focuses on making the first one as sharp as possible, and the second one is a long sword that he thinks is cool. But the other adventurers also ask him to create swords for them, since they know that the quality of his work is incredible. He agrees to do it for free, and Ariel notes that he can make a lot of money with his magic, but as Sparta looks at the mithril ore, he thinks a dungeon must have appeared nearby. He explains that people will flock to their village if they discover a dungeon, since the guild will open a branch for adventurers, who will raid the dungeon to make a profit. But he knows they aren't ready to welcome the guild, since they lack the resources to support them, and Van is worried that neighboring nations might try to take the dungeon from them. He adds that he's the black sheep of the family, so he'll be sent somewhere else if his father learns that the village has value. But the adventurers decide to avoid the dungeon until he grows the village, so that it will be harder for his family to intervene. After that, the villagers panic as they see armored lizards approaching, so Van orders them to raise the drawbridge, and tells them they must work together to defend the village. They man the weapons, and Kamzan notes that the adventurers are away, but Teal doesn't want Van to watch the battle, so he orders Dee to report what's happening. He sees there are 40 lizards and becomes nervous, since he knows that even veteran knights struggle to defeat one of them, and he orders everyone to fire the ballistas. The bolts are able to pierce through the lizard's armor, and he can't believe how powerful Van's weapons are. They take out the second wave of lizards, but everyone becomes worried as they run out of the iron bolts. Van recalls how the wooden sword he made cut a shield in half, so he orders Dee to use their wooden bolts. The knights think it won't work, but Dee decides to trust him and orders everyone to fire them. They turn out to be just as effective, so they're able to take out all the lizards, and Van is happy that no one was hurt. After that, Ortho teaches the villagers how to butcher the lizards, and Van realizes they have plenty of lizard meat, so he decides to have a feast with everyone. The adventurers enjoy the meat, and Ortho isn't surprised that the bolts defeated the lizards, since they were made of the same material as their weapons. But Dee hears them, and the knights ask him to also make swords for them. Ortho notes that they can make a fortune by selling the lizard's meat, and Van realizes that they can make 300 gold by selling the ones they have. But Esparta explains that when a town earns over 100 gold, they're required to pay 50% to Galpa as tax, and Van doesn't want him to know that the village is doing well. So Esparta notes that they can let Myrsa take all the credit, and Van thinks it's a great idea, since it will benefit both of them. The next day, the merchants Ben and Rango head to the village, but they're surprised to see how different it is, and Van shows them the materials they were able to get from the lizards. They decide to buy them, but ask him if he can wait for about a month, since it will take time to transport everything. He tells them it's okay, but he knows that the meat will expire, so he decides to give them a portion of it for free. He tells them the village also has weapons for sale, and he shows them the ones he made, but he notices that they want to monopolize them, since they don't want to help him promote them. So he notes that everyone will find out where the weapons are made, since Ben and Rango are always traveling the same route, and he tells them to set up shop in the village. They both seem to like his idea, so he builds a shop for them, and tells them he looks forward to doing business with them. After that, Esparta tells Van they should build a fortress town that can hold 10,000 people, and notes that fortresses are usually square. But Van plans to make a star-shaped fortress, and explains that it's the most optimal design for defense, but a knight suddenly reports that an emissary from the neighboring Ferdinando County has arrived. He meets the Viscountess Mara, and a girl named Ash, who is introduced as the youngest daughter of Count Ferdinando. He thinks they're there to investigate the village and win him over, so Mara tells him he's right, and notes that Count Ferdinando is wary of him. He explains that he isn't a threat to them, since he was just exiled into the village by Galpa, but she thinks he's lying, since he turned the village into a fortress. She thinks thousands of men were sent with him to build the fortress, but he laughs at her, and tells her there's a misunderstanding. He tells her only Kamzan was sent to join him, and notes that his family didn't even see him off, but she still doesn't believe him, and asks him to explain the village's transformation. He takes her outside, where he shows her how his power works, but explains that he was driven out of his home because his father thought he was useless. Mara realizes he's telling the truth, and reveals that she was ordered to offer Ash's hand in marriage, so that he would leave the Ferdinando County alone. She notes that she didn't want Ash to get engaged at first, but she now wants her to marry him, since she knows that he's extremely capable. She tells Ash she won't find a better man, but he notes that they should take time to think about it, and Mara tells him they'll spend the night in the village. She tells Ash to sleep beside him, but she refuses to do it, and Van decides to make an inn for them. As they eat together, Van asks Ash about the things she likes, so she reveals that she likes cute things, and notes that she can show him her dolls. After that, Esparta notes that Ash probably isn't an elemental mage, since her father sent her away to be married, so he realizes she was also driven out from her home, and he wants her to have a good life in the village. Mara notes that they should stay in the village for a few days, and Ash looks forward to seeing Van again, since she liked talking to him. The next day, Teal and Kamzan wake Van up, and they take him to the lake, where he sees everyone staring at a mermaid. He gives her food since he wants to befriend her, and when she tries it, she realizes that it's armored lizard meat, and she wonders who defeated the lizard. The villagers tell her it was Van, but she suddenly leaves, and everyone wonders if they will see her again. But the following day, she returns with her entire tribe, and their leader Vesta thanks Van for being kind to his daughter Priora. Vesta mentions that since he defeated an armored lizard, he must be OP, so he wants Priora to marry him. Van is shocked hearing this, and Vesta reveals that he wants someone strong to marry her, since armored lizards have threatened them for years. But Van explains that marriage isn't necessary, since he'll protect them even if he doesn't marry Priora, and he even builds a place for them to rest. But as Sparta reminds him that it's almost time to deal with the sewage, we learn that he placed sewage pipes under the houses so that they can use water to flush away the waste. The merfolk help them clear the sewage, and Vesta notes that they'll take care of it in the future, since he wants to thank Van for letting them live in his lake. Ash and Mara arrive, and they hear Vesta as he calls Van his son-in-law, so they wonder if he married a mermaid. After that, we see Van and Ash on a boat, and she tells him she's amazed that he made the lake and developed the village, but he tells her he couldn't have done it alone. Priora suddenly appears, and a group of kids rock the boat, so Ash loses her balance and falls on Van. The kids laugh at them, and Priora calls him her husband, so he reminds her that they aren't engaged, but she gets upset and swims away. Vesta learns about what happened, so he decides to hold a competition between the merfolk and the humans, and notes that Van must recognize Priora as his wife if he loses. Dee is excited to participate, and everyone tells Van they should compete against the merfolk, so he decides to take them on. Vesta tells him to choose the first game, so he picks volleyball, and Mara decides to play on his side, since she wants him to end up with Ash. Mara and Teal prepare to receive the ball, but Vesta scores a point, and Priora helps him dominate the game. Teal starts to lose hope, but Mara tells her they need to fight on, and they work together to make a comeback. The game continues, and they reach a match point, so Mara and Teal do their best to stop Vesta, but he still scores the winning shot. Teal is sad that they lost the game, so Mara cheers her up, and Vesta notes that the next event will be swimming. Van is worried since merfolk are expert swimmers, but Dee and Kamzan tell him they won't let him down, and they prepare for the next event. As the game begins, Priora leaves Kamzan behind, so the humans become worried, but he starts to catch up to her. She dives into the water and widens the gap, and her partner starts swimming to the finish line, but Kamzan reaches Dee, who starts to swim with incredible speed, and he manages to overtake the merfolk and cross the finish line, which impresses everyone, but they realize that his underwear was swept away. Vesta tells Van to pick the final event, so he makes shaved ice, and notes that the next game is a speed-eating contest. He notes that he needs a partner, so Ash volunteers to participate, and as the game begins, the players start eating the ice. But they all get a brain freeze, and Vesta wants Priora to marry Van, so he pushes through it, and Van thinks it's all over for him. But he realizes that Ash hasn't given up yet, so he continues to eat the ice, and everyone cheers for them. Van and Ash end up winning the game, but Vesta still calls him his son-in-law, and notes that he has proven himself worthy of Priora, so he realizes that nothing has changed. His stomach starts to hurt, so everyone looks after him, and Ash wonders if she can also surround herself with people who care about her. We learn that she was neglected by her parents, since she wasn't good at anything, and she thought she could entertain her mother with her marionette magic. But her magic was considered evil, so she was sent away to marry Van. But she has taken a liking to him, and she's amazed that even though he can only use production magic, he still impresses everyone. After that, Van tells everyone about his plan to develop the village, and notes that they'll have a barbecue feast, which makes them excited. But Ash suddenly approaches him, and tells him she wants to watch him work, so that she can see how he does things. After 2 weeks, we see that Van has expanded his area with his star-shaped wall, and Mara can't believe how much he was able to achieve in such a short time. He mentions how he also improved his ballista, so that they can shoot 2 bolts at the same time, and he gets Kamzan to show it off, causing a huge explosion in the distance. Mara can't believe how powerful it is, and she asks to buy one of them, but Van tells her they aren't for sale, so she promises to do him a favor in the future as an exchange. Van agrees to give her one, but wonders how she will transport it, so she mentions she will organize a carriage, and thinks she can produce the bolts on her own since they're just made of iron, but Kamzan suggests that she takes some of Van's bolts since they're special. He shows her his sword and uses it to cut her blade in half, so she realizes that the weapons that Van creates are on another level, and she quickly changes her mind and asks to have a few of his bolts. Ortho and his men come running, and there's a dragon that suddenly appears. Van wonders what they should do, and he thinks they can't let it reach the village. Mara helps to organize the defense, and Van thinks they should be able to hold it off with their ballista. As the adventurers run, one of them falls over, so Ortho tries to taunt it to draw the dragon's attention, but it doesn't work, so Kasala throws his sword at it. It starts to chase him instead, but they come in range of the ballista, so Van orders the soldiers to fire, but they struggle to hit the dragon. Mara decides to help, and Van knows that since she became a viscountess at such a young age, she must be an incredible elemental mage, and she blows the dragon out of the sky with her fire javelin. But it starts to get back up, and Van thinks he became overconfident after defeating the armored lizards, since the dragon is on a different level. He orders his men to fire all the ballista, and they manage to hit the dragon's wings, bringing it to the ground, but it still charges at them while dodging their attacks. Van starts to get worried, and Mara launches another fire javelin to knock it down. Its wings are burnt up, and Mara tells Van they should take the chance to retreat to the village. As they run, the dragon still comes after them, but Esparta steps up to buy time for everyone. Van refuses to leave without him, but Esparta tells him not to worry, and he uses his earth magic to drop a huge rock onto the dragon's head. He aura farms as he walks away, and Van can't believe how slow he's moving, but he runs on ahead to get to the village. He sees Mara in position, and he asks to call in his favor with her, telling her to pin the dragon down with her magic, so that the ballistas can hit it. The dragon gets free from the rubble, and Van thinks they still need more time to prepare the ballistas, but Dee and the other knights come running to help. The dragon blocks his attack, and they end up being blown away, but Esparta creates a wall to give them the chance to escape. As the dragon comes into range, Mara throws a fire blast to pin it down, and Van orders all the ballistas to fire. They manage to take it out, but as Dee checks its body, it suddenly gets back up, but he's able to cut its head off. Everyone celebrates the victory, and Mara congratulates Van, telling him he has some incredible people by his side. She also can't believe his ballista were able to pierce a dragon's scales, but he thinks that he still needs to improve them even more. After that, there's a ceremony to honor everyone who fought against the dragon, and Mara notes that most villages would have been wiped out. Dee is given the title of Dragon Slayer for killing it, and Esparta is recognized for his aura farming. Mara also praises Van as a genius and for leading everyone, so the villagers cheer for him, and Mara thinks about how she's never met someone as special as him before. We learn that she started out as a lowly knight, but once her aptitude for magic was discovered, she was able to quickly move up. After training relentlessly, she was able to become a commander at 16, and after achieving success on the battlefield, she was made a viscountess at 22, but she thinks that Van isn't like anyone she's met before. She announces an equal alliance with the village, promising to provide them with support, since she knows that Galpa left them to fend for themselves. She also notes that they won't need to worry about Count Ferdinando attacking them, and Van thinks it's a win-win situation, since they'll be able to turn their enemy into their ally, and he decides to accept the alliance. Esparta tells Van to turn his attention to city planning, because they are going to need new residents. But Teal suddenly interrupts them, and mentions that Ben and Rango have arrived with merchants from the Merry Chamber of Commerce. Van goes to meet them, and asks Ben and Rango how much the dragon materials are worth, so they note that the merchants will probably buy them for at least 100 platinum. He knows it would be equivalent to being worth $100 million, so he thinks he hit the jackpot, but the merchants tell him its market value is only 60 platinum. Ben and Rango think it's ridiculous, since the materials are in excellent condition, but the merchants tell them to play along, and remind them that they're also part of the Merry Chamber of Commerce. The merchants think they should take advantage of the situation, since they're the only traders who visit the village, but Ben and Rango refuse to cooperate because they want to do things fairly. The merchants tell them they'll be kicked out of the Chamber of Commerce, since they'll report everything to the president, and they walk away, but Ben and Rango don't regret their decision. Van tells them they should start their trading company, but they explain that it isn't easy, since they need to fulfill 3 conditions. The first condition is to pay the Merchants Guild registration fee, and the second one is to own their shop, but the third condition is the real issue, since they need to get an endorsement from a titled noble. Van thinks Mara can help them, so he decides to talk to her, and she agrees to endorse Ben and Rango because she thinks it will help her elevate her status. He tells her she can also take credit for defeating the dragon, since he doesn't want his father to find out he killed it. But she explains that dragons are rarely defeated, so the authorities will investigate her if she reports it, and they will eventually find out that he was the one who killed it. He wonders what he should do, since his family might summon him back, so she tells him to get himself a title. She tells him about the different ranks of nobility, and explains that she started as a knight, which is considered the lowest title. But she notes that since he's the son of a marquis, the king will probably let him start as a baron. She tells him to declare that he defeated the dragon, so that he can get himself a noble title, but he explains that he doesn't want to stand out. She understands how he feels, revealing that she gained enemies when she first earned her title, and notes that people even tried to use her, but she ended up destroying them. He wants her to use the dragon to climb the ranks, but she tells him not to worry about her, and notes that she'll let him take all the credit. After that, Van tells Ben and Rango that Mara has agreed to endorse them, and they're happy since they can now start their own trading company. They want to repay him for everything he's done for them, so they offer to buy the dragon materials for 130 platinum, and he accepts it since he thinks it's a good deal. As they prepare to head back to the capital so they can sell the materials, they realize that the merchants already left with their carriage, so Van decides to make a new one for them, and Mara tells them they can use her warhorse to pull it. We see the merchants as they think that Ben and Rango must be crying since they're stuck in the village. But Mara suddenly overtakes them, and they can't believe she's with Ben and Rango, wondering if she's planning to help them start a new trading company. Mara appears before King Dino, who thinks she's there to climb the ranks again, but she tells him about Van, and notes that he deserves to be a noble since he defeated a dragon. The knights can't believe it, and Dino wonders if he's an elemental mage, so she reveals that he only has aptitude for production magic. She notes that he saved the village from the bandits and used his production magic to develop it, turning it into a fortress with overpowered defenses, which took down the dragon that attacked it. She adds that his subordinates didn't suffer any casualties, and Dino doesn't believe her, so she shows him the dragon's fang and invites him to visit the village to see how much it has changed. She notes that Van should be welcomed into nobility, since he can help the nation improve its defenses, so Dino decides to give him the rank of baron. Everyone learns about it, so they start to talk about him, and Mara notes that things are about to get interesting. We see that Van has remodeled the village, and he even builds towers to help the villagers detect incoming threats, but he realizes he's hungry, so he eats on top of the tower. Esparta notes that they now have proper buildings and facilities, so he thinks they can now call their village a town, but they decide to call it Van Town, and he thinks it sounds ridiculous. Ash wants him to be casual with her, since it will make it easier for them to talk to each other, so he uses her first name, which causes her to blush. Teal tells everyone it's time for dessert, and she shows them the cake she made, revealing that she used ingredients from Ben and Rango. Everyone tells her it's amazing, but Van wonders why she isn't eating, so she reveals that she needs to watch her weight, since she's been eating too many sweets lately. Kamzan sees people at the gate, so Van decides to meet them, and they wonder if they're at the Ceto village. Van is confused hearing this, so Esparta reveals that it's what everyone used to call the village, and Van wonders what the group is doing there. Their leader reveals that they're from a neighboring village, and explains that they're struggling, since they're heavily taxed, and they don't have enough young people to do the work. He reveals that the Count took their youngsters away, since he needed soldiers for his army, so Van realizes they're from the Ferdinando County. He thinks he shouldn't welcome people from another domain, but he knows that they risked their lives to get there, so he decides to take them in. Their leader notes that they don't have money, but Van tells them they don't need to pay taxes for a while, and promises to give them food and shelter. He asks them how many people live in their village, so their leader reveals that there are 300 of them, and Van promises to build houses for all of them. They can't believe how generous he is, and he even offers to give them carriages to help them move. But they tell him they already have cows that can carry their stuff, and he becomes excited hearing this, since he thinks the town will prosper if they raise cows. We see the adventurers as they escort the people from the neighboring village, and Ortho notes that Van promised to reward them for such a simple task. But Ariel tells her companions to mind their surroundings, and reminds them that they were attacked by the dragon when they let their guard down. Ortho talks to a woman, who notes that she doesn't want to move to a remote village, but he tells her she's in for a surprise. When they reach the village, Van welcomes all of them and tells them he prepared food for them so they can eat as much as they like. They enjoy their meals together, and the woman starts to cry as she realizes she's in a paradise. We learn that Van worked hard to prepare everything, but he thinks it was all worth the effort, and the people ask him if he has work for them since they want to earn a living. He tells them they can help with the new establishments and notes that he also needs people to cultivate new fields. But they tell him they've never run businesses before, so he explains that it's fine since they can just stick to the tasks they know. Ron promises to help them adjust to their new lives, and Teal shows them the cakes she made, as Van reveals that she used the cow's milk to make fresh cream. Everyone thinks they'll be able to enjoy their lives there, but Esparta tells Van they should continue to develop their village so that they can become a city with a population of 10,000. Van finishes his tasks for the day, but Esparta tells him it's time to study, and Van complains that it's unreasonable to study after work. Esparta explains that it isn't true, and notes that no one has died from studying, but Orthos suddenly interrupts them. He immediately apologizes, and reveals that they discovered the entrance to the dungeon they've been trying to avoid, so Esparta notes that they have no choice but to report it to the capital immediately. Van knows that the adventurers will flood the village after they report it, and his father will also learn about the developments he made to the village. But he orders Kasala to report it to the capital, and explains that he's perfect for the job since he's the party's scout. Ortho thinks they should go as a party, but Van tells him to explore the dungeon with Ariel, and promises to pay them 1 large gold, so they tell Kasala to be careful on his own. Van feels sorry for him, so he gives him a mithril sword as a reward, and explains that he used up all of their mithril to create it. Kasala walks away with a smile, but his friends are jealous, and wish they could trade places with him. He begins his journey, but he comes across a group of orcs, and he thinks they're no match for him since his sword is OP. He easily cuts them down, and he meets a girl named Flameria, who thanks him for saving her. She wants to get to know him, so he tells her he's just an ordinary adventurer, but she thinks he's distinguished because of the way he carries himself. She prepares to leave, and notes that she's going to the capital, but he tells her he's also on his way there, so he invites her to join him. He lets her ride his horse, and asks her why she's headed there, so she reveals that her father was a baron, but he died in battle and lost everything after his lands were conquered. She wants to find a job in the capital, but he tells her to join him at the village instead, and notes that he can protect her while she works there, so she decides to go with him. We return to Van, as he decides to build a small outpost for the adventurers so that they won't flood the village. He tells Esparta to look over it while he's in the village, and Esparta notes that they will also need an order of knights to maintain the peace. But Van explains that he is already busy in the village, so Esparta needs to establish the order by himself. The villagers help Van get the materials he needs for the outpost, and he invites the strong ones to join the village's order. But they reveal that they already signed a contract with Esparta, and Van can't believe Esparta beat him to it. Kusala returns to the village, and notes that he already reported to the capital, but Van asks him about Flameria, so he explains that he took her there since she has nowhere to go. Van tells her she's welcome to stay with them, and she reveals that Kusala saved her from a group of orcs, telling everyone he was like a legendary hero. Van freaks out as he sees a group of punks approaching, since they all look like villains, but Kusala reveals that they're just adventurers. They tell everyone to return to the village since it isn't safe there, so Van realizes they're concerned about them, and Kamzan notes that they look intimidating, but they're actually nice people. They apologize for scaring everyone, but note that a monster might attack them if they stay there, so Van explains that they'll be okay, because their village is right behind them. The punks can't believe their village looks like a fortress, and they wonder how the villagers built their defenses, so Van shows them his production magic. He creates a temporary fence, and they realize that his power is broken, but Dee suddenly appears, and notes that he brought Van the materials he needs. They recognize Van, since everyone in the capital is talking about him, but they call him a brat, so Dee becomes angry and prepares to take them on. One of them takes out his sword, but Dee cuts it in half, so the punks realize he's stronger than them, and they start to treat him with respect. After that, Ortho returns from the dungeon, and he sees that Kusala is also back, but he's surprised to see a girl with him, so Kusala reveals that he met her on his way to the capital. They decide to stay in the inn, but Ortho and his friends can't believe it, and Van thinks he should build a house for Kusala and Flameria. Ortho becomes devastated hearing this, and Ariel reports that there aren't a lot of monsters around the dungeon, but she notes that there's a deep crevice near the entrance. Van wonders how far away it is, so she tells him it's about 2 to 3 hours by carriage, and notes that the environment around dungeons is harsh, so adventurers only build small bases around them. She knows that Van can build a huge base with his magic, but he doesn't want to leave the village, so he makes some unreasonable requests. He thinks she won't grant them and just give up, but she tells him she'll make preparations so that they can leave tomorrow, and he can't believe his requests didn't bother her. We see Van in a carriage with Kamzan, who mentions that he feels sick, but they encounter a giant troll, so the punks jump into action. They easily defeat it and start to celebrate, but Van thinks they're annoying since they're too loud. They continue their journey, but Van tells the driver to stop, and he freaks out as he sees the deep crevice. He can't believe the adventurers aren't scared of the unstable bridge they made, and he tells them to prioritize safety, since they could fall to their deaths if they aren't careful. He uses his production magic to build a sturdy bridge, and tells them it's safe to cross it, but as they reach the entrance of the dungeon, he wonders what kind of base he'll build, since there isn't a lot of space. He creates a gate for the dungeon entrance, so that the monsters won't be able to get out, and the adventurers help him build a place where they can stay. They're amazed by how it turns out, and as they rush inside, we learn that it has all the facilities they need to rest. They check out the terrace, where they appreciate the beauty of nature, and everyone thinks it's the perfect place to relax. Van tells them he built water tanks and rain catchers on the roof, and notes that they can't drink the water, but he isn't sure if they understand him. After that, Van tells Ortho to look after everyone in the base, but he realizes it's getting dark, so he decides to head back. He notes that Esparta will scold him if he isn't back before sunset, so the punks laugh at him, but Ash shows everyone a mithril ore, and they praise her for finding it. Van returns to the village, but he sees Esparta waiting for him, and he begs Ortho to help him, saying that he's in trouble because he went to help the adventurers. Ortho explains to Esparta that they're the reason Van was late, but Esparta refuses to listen, and he drags Van away. We see Van and Ash walking around the village, and Ash thinks everyone should be happy living there. Van asks her if she would want to stay, wondering what she actually wants for herself, so she mentions wanting to marry him, and she's embarrassed that she actually said it out loud, but she notices that he seems happy hearing it. Ben and Rango return from the capital, telling Van that they were able to form their new company, and they give him the platinum for the materials from the dragon. Van hands it over to Teal, but she gets nervous since she's never held that much money before. Rango also gives Van a gift, showing him the capital's latest crossbow that can fire up to 10 shots in a row, and he thinks he can use the design to further upgrade his ballista. After examining it more carefully, he's able to create a copy of it, but it doesn't quite work, and Ash is surprised that he actually failed at something. He tells her he fails all the time, and thinks he isn't special besides his magic, but she tells him he also has talent with a sword and with his studies, while she isn't good at anything. He isn't sure if he was really talented, and suggests that he can introduce her to 2 monsters that can help her become just as amazing. He asks about her magical aptitude, but she has emotional damage thinking about it, and Teal tells her she doesn't need to tell them, but she mentions her marionette magic. Van knows that the nobles consider it useless, just like his production magic, but he tells her to show it to him. He tells her magic is rare, and he makes a doll for her, so she shows them her power. Van tells her magic has limitless potential, and Teal suggests putting on a show for the villagers. Van thinks about making a puppet using mithril ore, but Ash thinks her power isn't suitable for showing off to others. Van mentions how everyone looked down on him for his production magic, but he ended up being able to bring happiness to everyone in the village using it, so he thinks they'll all enjoy her magic as well. We see everyone gathered at night, and the villagers wonder what's going on, so Van tells them all that Ash will be performing a show for them using her magic. They wonder what she can do, and as she begins to control her doll, they all recognize her magic. It seems marionette magic was used to attack the royal family in the past, so the villagers worry seeing it, wondering if they're in danger. Ash thinks about how she was always seen because of her magic, but Van helps snap her out of it, and she manages to put on a beautiful show as she makes the doll dance, which impresses everyone. They all cheer for her performance, and she thanks Van for helping her see that she isn't useless. After that, Kamzan reports that there's a carriage with the crest of the royal family approaching. So Van goes out and sees Mara, and she wonders how he's been. He mentions how he's gotten closer with Ash, and Mara is surprised to see she seems to have changed in such a short time, so Van mentions how he helped her to become more confident in her magic. Mara introduces him to the king, and Dino officially grants him the title of Baron, telling him to become a benefit to their nation. He explains that he came because of the incident with the dragon, and came personally to hear what happened, telling Van to tell the truth. Van agrees with his request, but also asks Dino to keep an open mind, since some of the things he says might seem impossible. He starts by showing Dino the village, explaining how he built the walls, and how they defend themselves with their ballista. Dino asks his Chancellor Apera what he thinks, so Apera mentions how ballista have a limited range and are inconvenient to use, but Van tells Kamzan to show it off. They fire 2 shots into the forest, causing huge explosions, and Dino is instantly impressed. They notice Van talking like he was the one who made the ballista himself, so he admits that he did, but they think he's lying, but he reminds them to keep an open mind. Apera also asks about the village's development, so Van mentions that he worked hard on everything. Apera wonders how many years it took to complete the walls, but Van tells him it was only a few months. Dino and Apera are completely confused, so Mara suggests another demonstration. As they walk through the village, everyone greets Van, and Apera is surprised that everyone is so casual with him. As they head to the lake, Dino and Apera are shocked to see there are mermaids just hanging out, since they're incredibly rare. Van decides to show how he creates a wall, so he starts by getting his Sparta to raise the earth, and he then uses his magic to transform it, completely shocking Dino and Apera. They take a break in the resting area, where Vesta wonders who Dino is, so Van explains he's like their Grand Chief, so Vesta decides to pay his respects. He introduces himself to Dino, and offers him a gift as a sign of friendship, but they're all shocked that it's orichalcum, which is known as a legendary metal of the gods. Apera thinks that a sword made from it would be worth over 100 platinum, and Dino thinks it would be even more, but Van makes it into a sword while they're arguing. He tries to hide what he did, but Dino tells him to reveal everything, and even promises to listen to his demands. So Van asks to be able to stay in the village, and never to be set anywhere else. The king finds it strange, since he would be treated well in the capital regardless of his status, but Van mentions that he wants to stay and protect the people there, since that's the duty of a lord. Dino thinks it's a shame to leave his talents there, but Van is glad he was able to avoid moving, and he can keep enjoying his slow life there. After that, Dino prepares to leave since he needs to get back to the capital, but there's suddenly an alert that there's a dragon approaching, so Van orders everyone to prepare for battle. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.